Why can't parents ever truly understand their children?
Life for our parents was much different than the society that we live in today. I'm Alex Gray, and I'm joined by Anthony Guzman. Say hi.
Hello?
Generations are mostly affected by the major events that unravel around them. Example, Generation Z's mentality has been set apart by the events of September 11th, 2001.
Whereas the baby boomers' distinct mindset was characterized by post-World War II.
Life in the 50s for the average teen was much different than what we experience in the modern day. For example, dating rituals and taboos from the past are a far cry from the social norms of recent decades. Pinning being one of the more extreme differences compared to today's practices was a common theme among the younger generations of the post-World War II era.
Penning was when a boy would give his pen to the girl he wished to date.
I guess this really showed the true colors of gender roles in the 50s. A more common practice, and more often much less controversial way of showing affection back then was when a guy would give his girlfriend his varsity jacket. The reason we don't see this anymore is because of the change of how we do sports.
Many of the causes for changes in sports was general cost, the more acceptance, inclusions of women in sports, and simply style changes.
These changes have killed off many traditions of the mid to late 1900s. Even the varsity jackets weren't safe for modernization.
Even with the end of many traditions in the mid-1900s, many were started. Music itself saw many of its genres being created and risen with popularity. Rock, jazz, and even Latin music gave rise in popularity during this time. Classical music had saw its fall in popularity. With many more traditions being created, many more were coming out of those. By mixing together, many genres became even more. Even with the rise of technology, we were able to make even more genres as a techno, trap, and even it affects the genres that were even created as in rap. But this gave way to even more cultures for each team, which gave into more diversities.
Speaking of diversities, 1950s wasn't really known to be very diverse, at least socially for that matter. Most people say that the 1950s, everybody really seemed, well, unless you're talking about race, everybody was more seen as individuals. Nobody was really grouped most times. Nowadays, everybody's always seen as representing a group or a multitude of groups. No one's ever seen as an individual. And in the 1950s, these individuals, especially individuals of entertainment, are what defined the generation.
Entertainment has been the thing that has influenced each generation more so than any other. With role models and controversial events happening and evolving around entertainment, social standards and trends being set by television.
Other trends by kids, unlike social standards, included things more mundane like cars. Cars before the 1950s were getting more streamlined and getting faster, but once the 1950s hit, it was all about car fashion. Cars would add fins so they look streamlined, but they were really just getting heavier with bigger motors with more horsepower. Also, in fashion, the fashion capital of the world moved from Paris, France, into London in Great Britain. The 50s underwent a great change in styles from the beginnings of the 50s, going to these more traditional and straight-fitting dresses, to a more colorful and more cultural time for fashion. Unlike the 60s, where the 60s went the same way with drastic changes, 50s, still drastic but not as much. Communicating in the 1950s was easier than ever before. Whether it be by spreading your ideals around on the newspaper, or the fashion shows in London, or by just driving your car around with a fancy new tail fin. Communicating your ideals was easier than ever before. But communicating was a lot harder than what we know of today. Today, we all use our cell phones and the internet, especially Generation Z, those born at the end of the 90s and onward. We were born into the age of the internet. We don't know anything else. Say if we had to say stuff by letter or through the newspaper, we'd probably go mad. Speaking of going mad, Generation Z's attention span apparently goes up to 8 seconds. A mere 8 seconds compared to what was before. But apparently we became better problem solvers and were easier to see and filter important information.
Also, with many other things that set us apart from other generations, as our entrepreneurship, the rise of social justice, and being able to self-educate ourselves.
Obviously, there's many ways. No, here, that's good. I'm going to keep this, though. I'm going to keep doing this. Today, we showed in this podcast, there are many reasons why we contrast from our parents. I'm Alex Gray, and I'm joined by Anthony Guzman, and thank you for tuning in this podcast. Thank you.